Hello everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. Today I'll be going over this Venom formation effect. Not every part of it, but just the main parts, how I made the layers for the alpha clipping, and just the general shader effects. So I'll wait for a few minutes so that people can join the stream. But this effect, it was pretty fun to work on. I've made a lot of variants of this kind of effect in the past, mainly my EV shader displacement technique, which I was hoping that would be replaced by EV Next's vertex displacement, but that got delayed again. And also, we will be going over all the new nodes in Blender 4.1 later, which will be very cool because we got more nodes than last year for this quarter. But yes, for this Venom effect, the basic breakdown of this is that there are multiple layers of this mesh that go from the outermost part to the innermost part. It's referencing the main mesh and then a mesh that, on one hand, I sculpted in order to make it thinner, and I used some procedural stuff to make it thinner as well. So to showcase this, let's see, let me turn off the GeoNodes parts. So here we can see this is just the outer layer mesh, the Venom model. But then there's a much scrawnier version of the Venom model that looks like this, which has been smoothened, shrunken, and all that, which is very funny to look at. It looks like a Venus flytrap. But what the geometry nodes part does is it looks at the, since it has the same topology, it looks at the mesh here and the original mesh, and then it creates duplicates, which actually, let's go and take a look at the geometry nodes section. That is not the right one. That is the gradient, which goes into the shader. Not too important, but let's go and look at the main thing. Unfortunately, I have not cleaned up this file, so please bear with me. I kind of streamed a bit impromptu. I wasn't really planning on it. So the basic concept that you need to know is that there are duplicates created of the main mesh, and then it mixes between position 0, which is the main one, and then the skinny Venom position. Now, I did make this a bit more complicated than it needed to be, because I tried making other variants and such, but that's the gist. We get the position of the other one, which in this case I made an offset, which isn't really necessary, but I'll let that slide for now. This could be optimized, but here's the gist of it. And also, I don't know why I added that. That was another test. Apologies for the messiness, but here's the gist. We create a ton of duplicates with the duplicate elements node, and you convert the geometry to instance so that you can make copies of the entire mesh. You realize the instances, but you also store a gradient from top to bottom that's normalized between 0 and 1 so that you can scale the offset. Now, this could just be a mix node, which I'll just showcase this right now. So if we have a mix node, let's see. Yeah, we'll mess up this file a little bit just to showcase this. So a mix between the original position, I don't know why I did that, but we'll just do this as position 2, just to make this as simple as possible for you all to possibly recreate if you want to. So here we want a named attributes, then we do that, and this should work. Let me just double check. Yep, there we go. So that is a simpler way of doing it. And then I joined the original geometry into the mesh because I do that just in case other parts of the effect relies on the mesh topology index, but it should be fine. And also for the gradients, let's go and take a look at this. Not that, we want the cost. Here, there's just a vertex group on the chest, as we can see here, and then we get the shortest edge path to there. So here, if we turn on attribute text, we can see that going away from that, the number increases. You could do this with just a UV map, which I've done for a previous version of the effect, so you could just use whatever you want. Okay, we have a fair amount of people here, so let's go on to the actual shader part, the important part. Let me hide the skinny version of the mesh. By the way, this can be rigged and fully animated. You just need to make sure that the skinny version of the mesh moves in a kind of proper way, but it should be good. So how does this shader work? So here we have just the textures and all that for the Venom model. We have the body, the head, and the mouth. I just made it transparent because I didn't want to deal with it. But inside the shader, what we're doing is basically the actual important parts is we have an alpha clip mask, which proceeds along the mesh like this. But what you can't see because of the alpha part is that the closer you go inside of the mesh, the more layers, you can see that it's progressed a little bit further. So how did I do this? Well, let's take a look. So first of all, we have a moving gradient. In this case, I have the gradient from the center of the object using the shortest edge paths node. It's not really necessary, you could just have a UV map, but this was just more convenient for me. And then, yeah, this was the previous UV map that I used, but we do not need that at the moment. That was just for testing. And then we move the said gradient like this. Pretty standard stuff, which if I were to just use a greater than node here, we would see that, oh, yep, it's doing kind of standard stuff. But the part that makes this special is all of this, which is a little unnecessary, but I just want to make this as cool as I can make it, I guess. All of this is just to make a texture that offsets the main gradient. So that's what this looks like. A mixture of the Venom texture, some roots, and like root v2, which is a texture that I made myself. Seamless though, which works out pretty well. Some noise and all that kind of stuff. So here we can see that it just warps into place. It doesn't need to be this complicated. Again, I've made several variants of it and then, you know, just did that. And then the layer offsets, we offset it by the layer gradient, which I will showcase in a better way. So let's show this without the textures. So without any of the texture offsets, it looks like this. Not exactly great, but it does work. So we can see here, we feed that gradient into a couple mix nodes. One mixes the normal, which this is the normal of the original Venom model, or kind of I did some editing to it, as you can see here. The multiply add just reverses the green channel, because apparently you have to do that. DirectX versus OpenGL bump maps are weird. And then the normal, that is the kind of growth bump map. So we can see there's the mixture for that. And then there's a mixture for the color, which here, I just used a maximum node so that the inner parts would stay black, because it looked a little bit weird with the chest design being apparent even when it just started growing. So that's what the maximum does. Not really necessary, and it could be cleaned up, but again, just want to showcase this. Without the layer gradients, we can see that it all spawns in at the same time, which doesn't look great. So what I did was just offset that by that, and the gradient is from 0 to 1. So we have that, and then the very complicated texture to make the roots and all that to make that look like that. Now, I don't think this is the best version that I can make. It looks decent enough, especially in the render. Like, look at that. That looks pretty freaking cool. But it could be much, much better. So let me just use a regular old noise texture. Oh, wait. Oh, I forgot. I offset the UV by the gradient just to make it so that it's not the same. So here, let's offset. Let's remove all of this just to show how, like, semi-unnecessary it is. Let's clean this all up, just to make a very nice and simple version of the effect. So let's delete that and that. Control J. I'll keep the normal maps the same, but the color I will just go and delete, delete, delete. There we go. So that is the simplest version of the effect. Some color changes after the fact because the gray was a little bit too light. But as we can see here, just using a greater than, it works out pretty well. So there we go. So now we can see here, let's just take a look at the output. We can see that it looks like this, which, you know, doesn't look too great. So let's go and fix that. Let's add some noise into the layer offset. So this already should look pretty good. Let's just wait for it. Like, look at that. Already, it's looking significantly better than it was originally. But we're not really getting that kind of wavy look to it. So how would we go and make it so that it looks like there's some waves, like it's a liquid flowing through the object or the layers? Well, the thing that I found, and I've used this technique years and years ago for my Iron Man formation effects, you mix the moving gradient. Wait, the moving gradient or the original? Yeah, the moving gradients with the noise texture. So if you do that with the 1D noise texture right here, it should look like there are waves propagating through the mesh. That looks very funny. So here we can see it's warping and doing all that cool stuff. So if we go and use another add node and a multiply, we can make it so that it offsets that. Actually, why don't we just use a mix node for simplicity's sake? Rather than having a lot more nodes, we can just have this. So it's a little complicated, and if you're wondering why I have all this in a node group, it's because, again, the body has a different texture set than the head. So I just did this to simplify the process by a large amount. Okay, so let's take a look at this with the wavy noise. So now we can see it looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit too noisy, so let me turn down the detail there. But as we can see, it's looking pretty good. Maybe a bit too extreme. So let's go and tone it down by a bit. Just enough so that the layers aren't apparent. Like, look at that. We're not getting the kind of root/vein look with the other textures, but it still looks amazing. Maybe even better than the original. So, again, optimizations, making it a lot faster and easier to work with. But that's another variant that you could do. But there we go, that is the Venom effect. Very cool, very nice. I want to try this on more models. I currently have the Venom Extreme model, but I do have Movie Venom, which, looking at Movie Venom versus the Extreme Venom, I think one looks a bit better than the other. I did make some enhancements to the textures and such to make it look a little bit better. But just seeing how bland the Movie Venom design is because they can't even have the spider logo on it is pretty funny. Okay. And also, I do have Carnage available. Which, yeah, needs some texture improvements, but it's interesting how they did it. But yeah, I do want to try out some of the Carnage effects because those were a bit more extreme than the Venom one. But for now, this is good. Alright, any other questions about this? How's Skinny Venom created? I did a bit of sculpting just to compress it, but I also did a technique where... Let me go into the geometry node one, the second one. I should have labeled this, but this is distance. And then that one is the mesh layers. To make Skinny Venom, I have this node set up that gets the distance to the other side of the mesh. So view it as, oh, we have a raycast going from each point on the mesh. That goes and looks at the inside, just the normal scaled by -1. Then it fires a ray to the other side. That gets the distance, as you would expect. And then you get the hit distance, and you do that, and then you displace the mesh by the normal, by the thickness amount. I did smoothen it if the distance was greater than 0.1. That just gave slightly better results. But that's how Skinny Venom was created. You could do it manually, but that just helped, and it did need manual tweaks, quite a few of them. But that got me most of the way there. Automate the process, makes it easier. But it could be art-directed. Again, this can be animated and art-directed. So if I were to move said model... the bones for this are a little bit weird. And it's lagging because it's recalculating all the layers of the mesh, which it could be faster, but I would just recommend when you're animating, just turn off the layers, and then you should be good. Which also, I would like to investigate how the weight paints are done, because this is quite a good model. But yeah, it can be animated, and as we can see, if we look at both versions, Skinny Venom and Jacked Venom are both moving in sync. So it works pretty well. Yeah, I should mention that this does not use simulation nodes. The only reason geometry nodes is used is to make the mesh layers, and in this case the distance, but again, you could get a distance gradient with a UV map. Doesn't really matter all too much. Okay, and also just to showcase I'll move the distance vertex group to the foot so that we can see the growth effect starting from the leg, and also let's go and hide Skinny Venom so that we can see the entire thing happen. So you can have it start from anywhere on the mesh, and it will grow to become the entire thing. Now, you would want, because, you know, Venom needs a human character to be the host, I believe. But you would usually have this coming from a human character and then turning into Venom and all that. That's a bit more complicated because if you have a different mesh, let's say Eddie, the topology does not match. So Skinny Venom, you would have to form to this, or what I would recommend, like how they do it in the movies, is there's a lot of just fading to the CG model from the human, from the actor. So doing it in 3D is a little bit more difficult because clipping is a bigger issue that you can't just alpha away as easily. But yeah, so it's not quite how the movie did it. The way the movie, I would assume, well, no, I know how the movie did it in some instances, but they used different techniques for different shots. For some of the shots in Venom Let There Be Carnage, since I watched some of the behind-the-scenes footage, they basically had it as a liquid simulation that was guided by curves in some instances. So what they would do is have like splines going down the arm to be like the water path / the veins and all that. And then it would be turned into a volume, like kind of like the remesh node in Blender, or volume, the volume to mesh node. It would be like that, but that's just way too slow for Blender and my computer. Again, I don't exactly have a $10,000 PC or anything. So this gives good enough results, if you hide that, on a budget. And also, if you're wondering why the part in the middle here is warped, that's because I warped the UV map for the textures. I did it a little bit too much, but it should be okay. So let's just go and turn up the noise. Yeah, that looks pretty good. But yeah, you can just play around with the textures until it feels right. If Eevee Next came out when it was supposed to, 2 years ago, I probably would have made this effect before, because, again, another way that movies do transformation effects is that they just displace, like, instead of having layers to go from Skinny Venom to Jacked Venom, it would just be the mesh moving, which we could do in geometry nodes, but that's rather slow, especially if you want more subdivisions. So what I would have liked is to use displacement in Eevee Next, because that uses the GPU, so it's super, super fast. And I could use GPU subdivision. Actually, is that only in... I think that's only in cycles. Anyway, what I mean to say is Eevee Next would have been very nice to use for this effect, but since it has been delayed, again, unfortunately, we can't use it. So it's back to what I've been doing for the past, like, 3 years, which is just using alpha layers, which is unfortunate because of the overdraw penalty. It's more expensive to render alpha layers than anything else, especially in Cycles. Cycles really, 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 really dislikes alpha layers for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Well, it overdraw probably, but I haven't looked into how ray tracers do that. But yeah, in cycles, we can see it shows up black because just there's not enough passes. So you just increase the transparency passes until it's good. And as we can see, since it clips together a lot, you need a lot of transparency passes. So this is not ideal whatsoever in cycles. You do not want to do this in a ray tracer because it is so incredibly slow and will slow down your entire scene. But fortunately, in rasterizers, it's not a piece of cake. It's still expensive, but it is significantly faster than ray tracers. So should be good. Have you ever seen the Arrival ink writing effect? I've seen it. I haven't felt the need to recreate it, but maybe I'll look into that in the future. Also, what would happen if I just made this much more extreme? Ah, that happens. And since the UV map is offset per gradient tile, if I were to disable that, we would see that this would happen. Actually, what happens if I advance it by the... Interesting. Why does it look so weird when that's happening? Well, you don't want to do that, so anyway. Let's go and bring that back to a reasonable level. There we go. So, it could be better, but at this point I'm just like, it's good enough. Even with just 2 textures. Technically 3 with the enhancements to the base bump texture. But yeah. How are you so good at geometry nodes? I've been using it since it was first being developed. And it's gotten a lot better. It still has a long way to go. But I'm looking forward to and I'll get into this with the 4.1. Well, actually, we can do that now, almost. Maybe. Any last questions, but then we can move on to the improvements to 4.1. Because 4.1 is coming out in less than a week, which I'm very happy about. Yeah. Because for those of you who don't know, I have been not using 4.0 because it released in a very buggy state. They needed to do 2 emergency updates right after the fact. Simulation nodes were broken to the point where it was almost unusable. Where whenever you would undo, the cache would just break and you would have to restart the file in order to get it back. There might have been other ways in order to do it, but I'm not aware of those. It was just more bugs, and it made dealing with geometry nodes, simulation nodes, much more difficult. So I'm looking forward to 4.1 because it finally fixes simulation nodes, the undo bug, and materials finally work. So another bug with simulation nodes was that 2 weeks before 3.6 came out, materials had to be removed from simulation nodes because there were some bugs with rendering those materials. They weren't stored properly. So it was removed in the beta, which is something that really shouldn't happen, but it was an emergency. And then for the next 2 updates, it was still broken. For 3.6, it was broken the entire time. In 4.0, it was broken the entire time. And then finally in 4.1, it got fixed because of the bake node, which, with that segue, we will go over to the bake node and other nodes in Blender 4.1. So 4.1 launches, I actually don't know when it launches, but I think it's the 18th or 19th of March. So here are all the new nodes. We have the bake node, which makes it so that you can freeze a mesh in its current state so that it doesn't have to keep reevaluating, which can lag your computer, either as a still frame or an animation. So basically the same tech that simulation nodes uses, the bake node uses as well. This node basically made it so that simulation nodes had to be fixed because, again, materials had to stay, and undo shouldn't have... they couldn't have it in a state where undo would just break it. So all those bugs got fixed, which I'm very happy about. It took 6 to 8 months, but I'm glad it's finally there. The menu switch node. So a new socket type that was introduced was enums, or yeah, that I believe that's how you pronounce it. But basically, you could have a menu connected to a group output, and you can select between different inputs, which will be very useful for making geometry node assets. You can have any data, almost any data type in there, which is very nice. The index switch is basically the same thing as the menu switch, but with an index input, which can be a field as well. So this one is a little bit more generalized, but this one is extremely good for UI and all that good stuff. They're looking into making other enums like these ones available making them be able to be exposed in node groups and the modifier tab, which would be really good because at the moment you cannot bake things from the modifier tab or outside of a node group, which is very unfortunate because with assets that you make, you want it so that the user never has to go inside of that node group. But that's for the future. We'll get there eventually. Sort elements. So this one, I need to look into a little bit more, but from what I've read up on it and experimented with a little bit, it'll sort the... Actually, maybe we could do a live demo of this. So, let's add in the monkey right here, and let's take a look at the index value. And another thing that was added... Wait, was this added in 4.0 or 4.1? I forget. But you can now see the actual data, and let me turn off the color opacity. You can see the actual data for anything that goes into the viewer node, which was requested for, well, which we wanted for quite a long time because that was something, you could see the numbers of the indices in edit mode, and it made sense for the viewer node. This was a community edition, and they also fixed the color of the numbers because it was pretty much unreadable in the edit mode version. But as we can see, we have the indices here, and the sort elements node will reorder the indices based on the sort weight. So actually no, we can keep that as the input. So if I were to use a position node and separate the XYZ, this should sort the indices by how low they are. So here we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and as we go up, the indice number goes up until we hit 506, which is really good. This will, it's more of a technical thing, but will make a lot of setups more useful. So that is something to look forward to. The split to instances node. This will basically take mesh islands and other, I haven't tried this out on other data types, but it should take mesh islands and separate them. No, not mesh islands. It'll take things with a separate group ID, which could be the mesh island input, which I would recommend, and turn them into instances. One thing that one of my followers asked was, how do you set the origin of those separated instances to be where the center of it is? And the answer is there's no good way at the moment. You could do that with the repeat zone, which, again, the for each zone would make it much faster if we could do that, but we don't have that. So basically, you can split things into instances, but you can't really make their origin point anywhere you want. Maybe that'll come in an update, but for the moment, this will just split things into instances, which could be useful. The rotate rotation node. This will be replacing the rotate Euler node, which is now depreciated. If you look inside the utilities tab and look in the depreciated tab, the rotate Euler node stands there alone. If we look at the tab, it should say use the rotate rotation node instead. So you'll see that these two nodes are not the same, which they're basically one node got split into two again, where if you want something to be rotated by the axis angle, you would need to use the axis angle to rotation node. So that would make it so that you can do the same thing as there, less convenience, but apparently it's a bit more generalized because the rotate rotation can do quaternions and Eulers, while this one is kind of limited to just Eulers, but you could use a conversion node and then it would basically be the same thing apparently. They were, a funny story behind that, they were just going to straight up remove the rotate Euler node, but I mentioned that that would be very confusing to users, and then they created the depreciated tab so that we can see nodes that will be removed eventually. Because at the moment, versioning will come in the future that will just replace this node with this node, but they did not implement that yet. So there's going to be the depreciated tab. One node that I think will be depreciated will be the vector rotate node. Let's see, vector rotate, where is vector rotate? Because there's the vector rotate node, which is basically like the rotate Euler node, but there's the rotate vector node. So basically the same as rotate rotation. Basically, there's, let me get rotate Euler. Actually, no, I think you can still search it, but it's at the bottom of the list. But basically, these nodes are the equivalent to these. They just rotate vectors instead of rotations. So this one probably will be depreciated in the near future for this one. But this one has convenient modes, while this one is just if you do it yourself. So we'll see if it gets depreciated. We'll see. But yeah, I am a bit concerned about the conveniency options being removed, but we'll deal with that as it comes along. Maybe they'll add them back in. The active camera node was added, which this just is a object reference for the object info node, which will give you the location, rotation, and scale of the current camera. Unfortunately, it will not give you the camera, like any data that the camera uses, like this, anything in here, it can't access. It can't access the render resolution or the aspect ratio and all that good stuff. It only gives you the location, rotation, and scale, which is useful in several instances, like if you want to make billboard particles, but if you want to do camera culling, it's still can't do too much beyond this instance. Which leads me into another thing. You could technically use drivers in order to get that data, like the resolution X, Y, the camera FOV and such, but it's very inconvenient. If I could add one node, it would be a view layer attribute node, so that you can get all that camera data in an actual convenient node that can output different data types. So that instead of the devs having to manually add in an active camera node, and then all the inputs would come in like a future update, and then in a next update there would be even more. We can just get all that data with a generalized node, and we would put in like resolution, camera.resolution X, and so on. Having a generalized node is much better than the devs having to manually code in a node, because there's always more that could be added. But that's just my opinion on that. Deprecated, right? Is depreciated a word? Because, yeah, it's deprecated. For some reason in my brain it says depreciated. And I actually spelled it depreciated here. Whoops. Deprecated. Thank you for pointing that out. So yeah, the rotate Euler node has been deprecated. The Musgrave texture has been deprecated from both geometry nodes and the shader editor. So in the shader editor, the only update to that for 4.1 is the removal of a texture node, which people will be very saddened by. But it got merged into the noise texture technically. But yeah. Depreciated sounds better actually. Yeah, I think my brain just said that because there's appreciated, and then the opposite of that, my brain says depreciated. Which I'm not sure if that's an actual word. I'll have to look that up. But auto smooth. I think that was in 4.1. I'm getting 4.0 and 4.1 mixed up a little bit. No, yeah, 4.1. Auto smooth has been eliminated, which technically is not a geometry nodes thing, but geometry nodes is the replacement for it. So here, there is no longer a normals option here, which technically this is better. It is better, but it can be a little bit less convenience. So, yeah, there's add custom split normal state. So it cleans up this menu by a good amount. But there's now a new node group, which is smooth by angle. It replaces auto smooth, which people won't be too happy about this because it might be a bit less convenient, but it is better because before, auto smooth was basically a modifier, but it was in the wrong place, which is why it was just a bit weird. So now it's available here, so you can just do this, same thing. It's a node group, so this is the actual node setup, which I'm so happy they made this nice and organized and snapped to the grid, because the other node groups that came into Blender, like in 3.2 with the hair nodes, those were daunting to look at. But here, you know, you can see what's going on. A little compact, but you can still see what's going on. And also, in object mode, if we look at cylinder, if you want to auto smooth something, there's shade smooth by angle. It replaces the previous one. But now, instead of being a kind of mystery value that you can't really evaluate or see, now it'll actually mark the parts as sharp, which is really good. It's better. So, and I would say it might make it more convenient. Well, we'll see. Because now, with the regular smooth by angle option, you'll have to click it again and again and again when you edit the mesh, or you could just have the modifier, and then when you edit the mesh, it'll keep doing the same thing. That feels like... No, that's probably still the... I think functionality is the same between auto smooth previously. But it's a better option, and it cleans up the tabs here. So, it's a lot better. It's also funny that remesh is there in the mesh data tabs, even though that's technically an operator. So I kind of foresee that being put into the modifier tab as well, because it's a little bit weird having that there. So I would expect that to be removed in the future. But I would see that as very far down the line. But yeah, any other questions? Let's see. I just watched your effects on Twitter. Can these effects be replicated in Unreal Engine Niagara anyways? Oh, anyways, really good stuff. Most of them could. Unreal Engine, especially in Niagara, is a much more powerful tool in some aspects, especially when with particle systems, because you can use GPU acceleration, and you can have basically dynamic simulated textures, which can be really useful for, say, pseudo fluid simulations that are actually fast. Meanwhile, dynamic paint in Blender is still very, very slow. But pretty much everything that I've shown today can be remade in Unreal Engine fairly easily, probably. I haven't done it myself because I just use Unreal Engine for work, and my work does not involve too many game-esque or flashy game effects, let's just say. Before Autosmooth was tied to custom normals, it was tied to custom normals, and that made absolutely no sense and was buggy. I would imagine. It feels like they're updating certain parts of the mesh workflow because geometry nodes needs a more stable base. Because with quite a few things, the mesh data is a little bit funky. And vertex groups still cannot be viewed by... Or, wait. Vertex groups are still a little bit weird with geometry nodes, because they're treated as kind of a separate entity than regular attributes. But I do foresee... They said that they're going to make them anonymous attributes. I'm forgetting the definition of that right now. But those will be regular, editable, or much more useful attributes later on. Like right now, geometry nodes can only edit pre-existing vertex groups. It can't create them specifically. I don't think. Unless that changed it. I don't think that changed in 4.1. Okay, So that should be everything for this time around. Oh, and also subpanels. So subpanels in 4.0, they would work in node groups, but not in the modifier tab, which was very unfortunate because that's where people would use them the most. But now, they now work in the modifier tab, which is very good, and I'm so happy about that. Because now a lot of the products that I have made and node groups that I've made, people will just be able to collapse it, and we no longer have to use the string input workaround to make spacers. Oh, shoot. Oh, wait, no, I just need to rename it. Yeah, this is what we would do to make spacers previously. It would just be strings, and a string input with no name, and then it would create this bar here. Really hacky, really funny. And it also did give you the option to go and put in, like, a label for a section. But now, subpanels do all that in one go. And you can still use the workaround in the sub panels, because you cannot nest panels yet. I think they said that would be coming in the future, but I'm not sure. So something that we could look forward to. There's some UI things that they wanted to add, but didn't have the time for, like showing where a socket would be moved to with like the little bar here, like what you would do with the, what was it? Forgetting where, when you would drag and drop values in other sections, it would have a little bar showing where it would end up, but unfortunately they weren't able to add that to here for the time being. So again, you can just have multiple panels and collapse them to make a very nice and convenient area with spacers in between them, which is very, very, very nice. Let's see. How do you make your projects look artistically appealing? I tend to get hung up on the technical details, trying to make it more complicated and not feel good visually. I can open up the Venom project and show what I did for that one, because I struggle with that as well. Like, you work on a technical effect, and this is a trap that I fall into constantly. You work on the technical aspect to see if it's possible to make this effect or that effect, and then when you finally have it, you're like, okay, how do I present this? How do I make this something that's actually useful? And in this case, the answer was, well, get the Venom model and then put the effect on an actual model with Venom on it. So that was fixed most of it. But the other part was, hey, how do we light it correctly? Which in this case, I have to, let me go and show what this looked like before. So before, it looked like this, and there's still a sunlight. Here, let me go and hide everything else. So this scene, as we can see, it looked like this. Usually I preview it like this, which it's like, okay, we make sure that all those parts are working as intended, that's good. Which HDRIs are the main thing that make something look better. So in this case, I used Metro Nord HDRI, which is free. I forgot where I got it from. I think it was Texture Haven, but I'm not sure. With this one, I reduced the resolution significantly to make it smaller, but it also gives this kind of blurry background effect without needing depth of field, which is very nice. I also clamped it at 2, just because some parts were a little bit brighter, which in this case I didn't need. I didn't need too much bloom happening, so I just clamped it. I rotated it so that when the camera was rotating, we didn't get too many super high highlights. And then in this case, I just set the value to 2. So we got there. But you need more light, because right now it looks rather plain. So what do you do next? Rim lights. If you want to make something look good, you just need rim lights. That's what I've learned. And also, I did put in a little underlight right here, just so that it would act as if there was bounced light coming from the floor. Not really necessary, but it does show a bit more of the textured detail. So that was good. So in this case, I had a sunlight, which is acting kind of like a rim light, or just a side light. But here, like when you look at 2D art, And you're wondering, wow, why does this look amazing? It's probably because the edge is glowing with a rim light. So I just do that in 3D, and that makes it look really, really good. And you can change the mood. Like right here, the sun's shining from the back, which gives it kind of, I don't know, still an ominous feel. If it comes from the bottom, then it gives a kind of like the character is standing up on a hill, and you get that happening. And here, it's just, you know, it shows the muscle detail and texture detail, so that worked out pretty well for this. And it also shows the bump map for when it's forming. I still feel like I could make the formation texture look a lot better, but again, it's alright. Okay. I did go over how this effect was made earlier in the stream, but I'll just do a simple breakdown. I have a buff version of Venom, and then a very skinny version of Venom that I made, and then, or sculpted, edited, used a bit of geometry nodes in order to make skinny Venom. And then I make a ton of layers going from original Venom to skinny Venom, and then those act as layers for a texture to form. I wish I could have used vertex displacement, but Eevee Next got delayed again. It's been 2 years. It's a very unfortunate story with Eevee Next. But maybe it'll come in 4.2, and I'm hoping that it's faster than regular Eevee, because at the moment it is 5 times slower and noisier, which is unfortunate. They are working on it, but it's taken a lot longer than they originally planned. It was originally supposed to come out in 3.2, and it's been, development has been rough due to technical requirements, like Apple's Metal had some issues with the shadow maps. The shadows seem to be the biggest issue with it. But maybe they predict, again, that it'll be out in 4.2. And I hope it happens, because it has been a long time waiting for vertex displacement. Let's see. If we could write vertex groups with geonodes, I wonder if we could use the bevel modifier with it. I mean, if you could write vertex groups with geometry nodes, I think it would work. I'm actually, If you edit vertex groups in geometry nodes, I think they still work in the regular modifier system. I think they do, but I'm not sure. Because that's another limitation with geonodes. They don't work with regular modifiers all too well. But I think that does work. But we'll see. Again, the goal with geometry nodes is to replace every single modifier that we have with a editable and more generalized variant. But it is going to be a long time, years, before that becomes possible. Because, well, how would you do the armature node in geometry nodes? You don't have access to all the vertex groups, and converting all these options to code would be very difficult to do. You can't access the bone transform data. It's going to be a long, long time before that's possible. But we'll see. We'll see. The one thing I was kind of surprised by is that they didn't make like a wrapper or not a wrapper, but make it so that modifiers could just be in the geometry nodes environment. Because right now, geometry nodes does its thing, and then it hands it to other modifiers. I thought that when it was first being created, that we would be able to just put modifiers into geometry nodes as is. Like, just make a system where you would have object inputs, vertex group inputs, and then all these inputs, and so on. But then again, enums are still not a thing. But we will see in the future. But the goal is so that none of the modifiers are strictly hard-coded. You could go inside them, you can look at them, and they would just be very generalized and easy to change / improve in the future. But we'll see when / if that happens. Like the physics nodes, all of the physics nodes and geometry nodes are at the ends of their lives. to be replaced by geometry nodes / simulation nodes. This will also be years away. Oh shoot, I should not have clicked that. Because currently, geometry nodes cannot access the rigid body world, the collision world, and collisions and all that are very difficult to do. Like, all these options are not available in simulation nodes. Well, yeah, most of these are not available. I don't think. But yeah, it'll be a long time before all this gets updated to geometry nodes. And I hope that there is a kind of a code or a scripting node inside of geometry nodes so that they could transfer a lot of the code from here to there without having to convert it to nodes, because that would be much more compact and take up a lot less space. But as far as I know, the function node has been it hasn't been worked on in the past like 3 months, if I'm correct. Like the last time it was worked on was in December 2023, and no work since, which is very unfortunate because I was really looking forward to that node. It would have been incredibly useful. But here's to hoping. So from what you're saying, it's beneficial to get into the coding side of Blender with future updates. If you want to contribute to Blender, it would be very appreciated. I have wanted to learn C++ and Python because geometry nodes uses C++. Blender usually uses Python, but for speed, C++ is being used. And yeah, I've gotten to the point where I can make my own nodes, but I haven't been able to make a node where it's basically the named attribute node, or the named attribute node, but I can access view layer properties, because that would be so powerful and allow for so much more. But I do not have the time to research into that and create it. But it would be the most powerful node in geometry nodes. Well, okay, well, maybe it would be a very powerful node, because, oh, you want to know which parent, if you want to say, like, hey, instead of the active camera object pointer, let's get the parent of the current object. Which, as far as I know, the deform curves on surfaces node does use that. It gets the parent data. I would have to double check. It's been a while since I've looked into the source code. But this node, it's a black box. But it's interesting. And currently it cannot be made with a node group, because at least as convenient of a node group. It's close, but it uses data that we cannot get. One of them being, and I should double check this, I'll probably double check this after the stream, but accessing like what object is the parent of the current object. Because if you have that, you can say, oh, let's get the geometry data and then put stuff like the curves, in this case, hair, whatever you want, onto that surface. It would be extremely useful, and it would simplify a lot of node groups. It would allow for you to get the local location, rotation, and scale of an object rather than just original and relative. So, I say all that to say, it would be very useful if we had a view layer named attribute node. I wish I could make it, but I do not have time to research C++ and Blender's coding structure. How about a muscle simulation via geonodes? That would be too complicated to create because of collisions. I would recommend using a cloth simulation system. While all the simulation systems are at the ends of their lives, the dependencies are a bit broken when it comes to moving collision objects. It's the best option at the moment, unless you want to code your own face-to-face collision system and all that, relay integration and all that. It's better to just use the inbuilt system for the next 2 years, 3 years. We'll see when we get that ability in GeoNodes. But yeah, geometry nodes, it's really powerful. We can do a lot of stuff that was never possible before, just showing like what we currently have. But it still has a long way to go before it's as useful as, say, what, like Unreal Engine's blueprints and such. In some ways it's better, but it's still lacking a lot of data inputs. So, yeah. Like Blender Shader Editor is very, very powerful because, like, not too people know about this, but it does have the view layer attributes, which means that you can get stuff like the 3D cursor location, which they added a specific node for that in the geometry node tools option, but you don't have access to that in regular geometry nodes, probably for good reason. But if you want the cursor, let's see, cursor location, I forgot what it was. I think this works. Yeah, just like that, you have access to the 3D cursor location. Now, should you have access to this data? I don't know, but you can get it, and it's very useful. You could get access to the camera.location. So camera.location. So this will give, wait, what is the, object? Or maybe this is working and I just need to absolute the, yep, okay. So right now it's giving you the location of the data. So this was available many updates ago. Well, we just got the ability to find the camera's location, rotation, and scale in geometry nodes with the active camera node. This was always possible because it was a generalized node, possible since 3.2, because that's when this was introduced. Before, it was just, I think, geometry object and instancer, which you can get object colors and all kinds of other object data. This node is extremely powerful, and the devs use it in their open movie projects. Good amounts. And this data would be very useful in geometry nodes, but unfortunately, I haven't had the time to try to create it, but it would be a great addition. Probably a community edition, but it would be really nice. The more I say it, the more I'm motivating myself to look back into the code to try to create this in geometry nodes, but it would be so useful. I'm doing stuff in Blender Python and the API is crying emoji. I have heard that it is quirky. People do a lot of cool stuff in it, but I've heard that it's not the easiest to deal with. Yeah. You can, another thing that I should mention, you can technically get this data using drivers and then put it into geometry nodes, but you have to use drivers. Drivers only can affect floats, integers, and booleans, which means that if you want to get a vector for this, you would have to use the X location, the Y, and the Z, which I'm forgetting. The dot, I am forgetting how you get the individual axes. But you'd have to get each one individually, and when you copy a node with a driver on it, the driver breaks, and sometimes in node groups, drivers just break, which is very unfortunate, so it's not a viable method of getting this data. So, if anyone's listening who has interest and the ability to make a node like this in geometry nodes, please get in contact with me. I would like to learn from you because I've really wanted to create my own nodes and hopefully put them into the main version of Blender, but it is far beyond my coding abilities at the moment. It's location 0. Yeah, I thought it was location 0. Absolute. Yeah, no, it should be that. I don't get why it's not. Factor? Like, it should be outputting a float. Let me use let's try doing it with the driver method, which averaged value, this needs to be If you're wondering why I dislike using drivers, this is why. Context property, I think it's this, and then we put in that. So let's go into here, edit driver. There we go. Update dependencies. Is it seen? I forgot how to do this. It's been a while. Where is it? Active scene. Okay, nope, it is that. And also, these sometimes don't update correctly due to dependency graph things. I think one of the devs said that it should be active view layer, but as we can see, you need extra inputs for that. So, anyway, it's much more convenient to have, oh, I was getting the cursor location. My brain. Sorry, everyone. There we go. So here, it should show the cursor location, but only one of the axes. And I'm really, really confused why it's not. Okay, so it wasn't just me. I was viewing the wrong thing, but it's still not showing it. Well, over here, as we can see, it doesn't update automatically. But if I do that, it will update. So you can see why. Drivers, not the best. But yeah. Oh. But yeah, now if I do that, the view layer attribute node just automatically updates, which is very, very nice. But the driver is not, which is unfortunate. Yeah. Let's see, I might be able to help with that. I have a okay grasp of low-level programming languages. I could make a custom node, probably. Not sure if I could find the time. Yeah, time has been the biggest obstacle for me. Working on great stuff, but it is taking up pretty much all of my time. But yes, we are past an hour now, so I should probably wrap up the stream. But yeah. Like, sorry for talking about this pipe dream of a node, but as we can see, you can access all the data, any data that you would want. Like, you want to access, here, let's copy the full data path. I hope that this will actually work. Yes, it does. Okay. So, if you ever wanted to know how many samples EV is running at, you can, just with this node. Which, I don't know why you would want to know that, but you can get it. But the part where it would be useful is for, say, finding out what the render resolution is, so that you can put, like in geometry nodes, for camera culling, automatic camera culling that is adaptive to the resolution. Would be very useful. You can get the camera data, any data that you want, that can get. So it would be one of the most useful nodes. But it's just a matter of finding the time to, and, you know, making sure that's within the bounds of what the Blender devs are comfortable with adding. Because I do not know how stable this is. I'm assuming it would be pretty stable because I would assume that the Python API also accesses data in a similar way. I haven't looked into it too much. The last time I made an add-on was 3 years ago. So it's been a long time. But yeah. Like, if you want the max size of the depth of field, you can get it. I don't know why you would want that, but you can get it. So just copy the data path. In some cases, you need to... Yep, that works. Actually, the bloom radius. Like, there possibly could be... Copy full data path. There could be some instance where that would be useful. Like, oh, if the bloom is set really high, then tone down the emission shader. I don't know why you would want that, but having the option is really good. Ambient occlusion, being able to detect all of that would be so useful for node groups and assets. I'm just going to go through and play around with this for a little bit. We're past 1 hour, so this is just extra time. As far as I know, we can't detect enums, so that's unfortunate because I really would have liked to... Like, one thing that I tried doing in a previous stream was trying to detect Let's see, copy full data path. Like, this will output a string, but I think there may be a way to say, oh, if the render engine string equals this, then output true, which I forgot what it would be, and I'm not even sure that the view layer attribute node can do that. But you could imagine how useful that would be, being able to decide, oh, should I be in Eevee mode or Cycles mode? There are so many assets and material packs that I can think of that would be able to use that. But yeah. What keyword could help me find the code for drivers? I'm not sure. The part that I've looked into with the source code has pretty much only been geometry nodes and a little bit of the shader nodes. I'm not sure about drivers. Have you seen Dune Part 2? I have. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. I don't know too much about the Dune world. I've only seen the scenes on YouTube for Part 1. I wish I saw that in theaters, but I did not. Dune 2 was really good. I would highly recommend watching it. Even if you don't know too much about the Dune world, it's pretty understandable. It's just, yeah, that would be spoilers, but it's a good movie. Very stylistic. It has the vibe. The vibe is right in that movie. Lots of cool uses of monochrome film. I think they said that was infrared, but that was a really cool scene. Really cool. But yeah. Oh, also, let's copy this full data path, not pack. So this is, Eevee use screen space reflections. You can detect whether or not Eevee uses screen space reflections, which makes this look really, really weird. But that, like, this amount of data, like, just imagine if you had that in geometry nodes. Like, it could cause a lot of things to go wrong, so the user would have to really know what they're doing. But the amount, like, the power is so cool. Like, if motion blur is enabled, then, like, run this in a fast mode, I don't know. Volumetrics. Oh, that would have been so useful. Like, if you have a volumetric effect that's made in geometry nodes, matching it with the clip start and end. Again, this is pretty niche, but there are many legitimate uses for a view layer attribute node, like, again, getting all the camera data without having to code in every single aspect. Cartesian Caramel, do you have any source for learning geometry nodes from the ground up? I bounced a couple of times, but I feel like they are used for special effects. My bad. I would recommend Arendelle. They have a beginner course for geometry nodes and some, I believe, some paid courses as well. With geometry nodes, the way that I look at it is... here, let's make a new geo node so that we don't have to look at the auto smooth. And by the way, the auto smooth is not needed in this setup. It's because this effect was made in previous versions of Blender, and then when you update and an object has auto smooth, it'll convert to the node group automatically. But think of geometry nodes as just, hey, we have data. In this case, oh look, a UV map. We can do stuff with the geometry based off of that. You're getting data, as you've probably seen from my channel's intro. You get data, you manipulate that data by, say, like multiplying it or doing whatever you want, and then you set that data. And you can set that data in various ways. Like in this, the set position node is literally setting the position attribute. Everything's an attribute. So if you can access it, you can edit it, and then you can set it. That's the whole thing. And this is one of the... I would say this is one of the things that I like... One of the reasons I like geometry nodes a little bit more than Houdini, just for simple effects. Houdini is much more powerful and always will be, so I would recommend that for a lot of things. For a lot, if you want to do any kinds of like fracture effects, I would recommend it. But In geometry nodes, it's very convenient to just get data and set data with these nodes. It's just, oh, you have that. You can choose whether it's a float here. It's very convenient to do that. And for many effects, that basically all the effects that you've seen me do, the store named attribute node is the node I rely on the most. Like, the capture named attribute does a similar thing, but it's a little less convenient, so I usually rely on this one. Like here, you don't want to set a UV map to be a float. You want that to be a 2D vector on the face corner domain for technical reasons. But this means that even if I were to make a new thing, like, thing 1, if I were to go and apply this modifier, all of a sudden we have a new UV map, which is cool. So that's the basis behind all of my geometry node effects. When it comes to, like, I don't know, doing... And all of the attributes that you set here are accessible in the shader editor besides vertex groups. Even though I think there's another way of getting it. But yeah, what's the point of capture attribute? It's basically a more efficient method. It only calls the data that you capture when you need it, so it gets discarded if it's not used. It doesn't, like, it's just a more memory efficient store named attribute node. Yeah. With the capture attribute node, the data does not get preserved like when I applied the modifier unless you output it like this, and then you determine that the output is a 2D vector, which you cannot even set UV maps by putting them as an output. So just use the named attribute node. And it also means that there's less spaghetti in your node setup because you basically have portals, which the Blender devs considered adding a while ago, but they just didn't really add it. They thought about adding portals before they reintroduced the stored named attribute node, because this was in the test versions of Blender 3.0, but they removed them and then added them in 3.2 because they were one of the most useful nodes out there. And then in terms of you learning other parts of geometry nodes, you just you need to learn what data you have, and then, like with the curve, with the read, you have access to all this data. Just know what data you have access to. It's still a bit limited because, again, whenever there's an input node, the devs have to code that into there. And in some cases, like here, you can access some of the data with the named attribute node. I don't think you can get the bevel weights with that yet, even though the bevel modifier does access that. Actually, yet, can it? 1 second, everyone. I'm just going to do a little test. So you can get the crease data on the point or edge domain, which is very useful. But can you get the bevel weights? Here, let's set that to be there. I think, can you get that yet? Bevel... Oh, you can. Okay. Wow. When was that added? Because maybe it was always there and I just didn't look at it, but the named attribute node is basically the input node, but way more generalized. Because, again, you can get every single vertex group in there. Well, it's basically, the devs don't have to code all of the inputs, so you get a lot more. The devs don't have time to code all of the inputs, so you just have the ability to view them all here, which is very, very useful. There's still stuff that's out of bounds, or this can't access, but it is the most useful input node. And then for learning other parts of geometry nodes, it's just like learning modifiers. You go and play around with the nodes and you're like, oh, that does that. Or you look at the documentation, which I would highly recommend, because it'll tell you all of the quirks without you having to test it, but I do recommend just playing around with it as well. And, yeah. Like the, points to vertices node, how does that work? It does what it suggests, but just knowing how the data is handled and then converted from like one type to another. There's a lot you can learn about geometry nodes, but I've basically learned all of this within the past 2 years, because geometry nodes was remade about 2 years ago. Maybe a little bit more? A little bit more at this point. But I would say it's the easiest to learn. No, okay, maybe not the easiest, but it's fairly easy to learn if you just look at it from the perspective of, oh, I'm just getting data or getting colors if you come from a shader editor background like I did. I'm switching up the colors, I'm scaling them. I'm getting a random color per vertice. Because again, with this it usually acts on the vertices, but sometimes, you can make it act on the edge, the faces, the face corners, and so on. Just knowing how the data is being handled, and also always use the view layer, always visualize the data that you're dealing with, either in colors or by the actual, since I have so many of the layers, it is very, very laggy. But viewing the data like this is very, very useful as well, especially if you're viewing data that goes above 1, like say this is 500 and whatever. You can't see this normally with just the color method. So that's why I would recommend. And this is kind of true for all programs. I mean, you just get the data, you edit it, and then you set it. But in geometry nodes, I would say it's very easy to go and do that because it's just, 3 nodes, you can just put them in and they're good. You don't have to declare it, which is really good. Very convenient. Alright, have you used Houdini? I have. I just find geometry nodes a bit more, again, convenient, mainly because it's in Blender. Houdini is way more powerful and way more versatile, but most of what I do is in Blender, and geometry nodes just makes what I do in Blender a lot better and more powerful. So I hope that explains that. So I think we'll wrap up the stream here. We're at 1 hour and 16 minutes. Do you remember Seth Butling from the older days of Minecraft? Yes, and I know that he came back and made a rigid body physics system in Minecraft using a data pack, which is incredible and way over my head. It's incredible that that's even possible using a very hacky method. I wish I knew how to digest the book that he used for that. And I really wish I could do that, but at the moment my skills are not at that level. It's using matrix math, quaternion math, and separating axis theorem. Basically, making collisions from scratch, which I would probably have to do in order to make my own physics system in geometry nodes, because I don't think the geometry proximity, sample index, and all that nodes I don't think they're good enough yet in order to do that, especially for like edge-to-edge collisions and such. But that is incredible that he was able to do that. Also really cool to see him back doing Minecraft content. But yeah, way above my level, but I hope one day I can get to that level. Looking at the code for the shader attribute nodes doesn't seem very complicated. I'll look into it tomorrow. Oh, that's very cool. Don't feel pressured in order to do that, but it's very cool that you're looking into that. I never thought of nodes like that, but nodes makes much more sense. Still confusing, but I like the way of thinking. Yeah, because even in coding, it's like, okay, we make an attribute, we give it a value, and then we can edit that value later on. It's a bit more complicated because you have to declare it in cases and all that. In Houdini, you can also do that, but it's not as convenient. In Unreal, in Niagara, you could also do that, but it's not as convenient. In geometry nodes, it's the most convenient that I've seen it. Like, Unreal, like recently I had to do some Unreal Engine blueprint stuff, and in there it's, well, no, it wasn't even, well, it was kind of blueprint related. It was fairly convenient, but geometry nodes is just the most convenient that I've interacted with so far. Like every attribute, every domain at your fingertips. And then you can set whatever data you want, any domain, with just a few clicks. Like that is extremely powerful, and I really like that. But again, all this data is only on the geometry level. You can't get object info data, which would be, again, in the shader editor, you have access to all the data. Object, instancer, well, you can get this with geonodes, but you can't get object level and view layer data as well. Because one thing that I've shown before, and I'm sorry, I will end the stream, but I just have to go over this again because it is hilarious that this is even possible. But you can get the location data of the parent of an object, which I will showcase here, but that's not the funny part. So if we go to put this on the object level, parent.location, location, we should see, oh, wait, why did I put a slash there? There we go. We should see that now we're getting the location of the parent, which as we can see when this moves, nothing changes, but when this one moves, it does. But here's the weird thing. It doesn't have to be only one parent long. You can chain this. Let me also put that material on here. So this one is referencing this because that's its parent, and this one is referencing this. But you could go even further. You can get the parent.parent location. So this one is now referencing this one, and this one is referencing nothing because there is no parent. So you can chain which parent you're looking for. So you could go from parent, parent, and you can chain this as many times as you want until you hit the 64 character limit. Which I think it's 64 characters, I'm not entirely sure. But you can just keep going, which I don't know why you would need to use this, but sometimes it's useful. In geometry nodes, this would be very useful, just like, you know, just getting parent location, rotation, and scale. Because one issue that I've run into in the past is that, oh, when you're getting object info, you only have the original coordinates, which is in world space, or local or original, but you don't have, relative or original, my bad. Which relative is relative to the current object that you're working with in geometry nodes, and original is in world space. But what you don't have access to at the moment, automatically at least, is the ability to find it in local space. So this data, the data that the object has on its own person. So in this case, I'm not sure which one this is reading, but I don't think it's reading this data. But you could just get like the object's own location and the parent location, subtract them, and then boom, you have the local one. Like this one right here is getting the object's current location, and you can get the rotation by using rotation underscore Euler, and that will give you the object's current dot Euler. Wait, what is it again? Oh, and also to find this data, you can hover over it with the Python tooltips enabled, which in this case it is rotation underscore Euler. Did I spell it wrong? I don't think I did. Or you could copy the full data path and then make it so that it's on the correct domain. Which I thought, why is it not, oh, there, oh, it was just, oh, going negative. Okay, so you can see it, but yeah. Then the scale, you can get that, and also you can check all of this, like parent camera lock. The thing that I'm interested in, if a view layer named attribute in GeoNodes is possible, is that if it could get object references, again, the parent data, because currently you can get the active camera data input. Like, could it get string inputs potentially? Because here it's only float vector, that and that, but the possible data inputs are string and all of that, even image, which I wish we had that in the shader editor. But you can get object and, you know, all that cool stuff. Even menu ones, but I think that's a different thing. I say all that to say it could be a very powerful node. But I've talked about that for way too long. I'm very sorry about that. But, yeah. I hope you all enjoyed the stream and the little breakdown of the Venom effect, and all the new nodes in Blender 4.1, and also my ranting about a node that I wish would be in Blender. But it's fun. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Have a good one. Wait, I'm gonna check the chat one last time. I have no idea how edge collisions work. In theory, like, I've looked into it a little bit, and I've tried recreating it in Blender, but converting the code to nodes has been a pain. I got it like 90% working, but there's an edge case where it fails. You basically find out the closest point between two edges, and then you say, oh, that's the collision point, and then you repel it by that. There's a lot more to make rigid body collisions in GeoNodes, much more complicated. But I feel like I'm getting closer, but we would need the for each loop to make that work. Anyway. It's cool to listen to someone who knows his stuff when it's a rant state of monologue. I'm glad you enjoy it. Definitely did, thanks. Alright. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Oh, one more question that I just saw up here. Sorry, everyone. What did you think about the data? What do you think about data block access in GeoNodes? Like how you can select a group of nodes, but with different kinds of data. Is that plausible? I'm wondering why Blender didn't add that yet. Think about data block access. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but I think you mean like getting access to like, oh, the material data block. Some of this is possible, like you can, with the view layer attribute node, you can, or is it the object here? One last tangent, but if we put this in here, you can see parts of some of the data block stuff, but it would be nice if that were possible, because again, the hardest thing in geometry nodes and in the shader editor, I guess, well, the shader editor is pretty much complete, or I shouldn't say that. The hardest part is getting data into geometry nodes and out of it, but it's fine. For example, like the camera, you just get everything focal length. Oh, as sockets. Yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about. Rather than the devs having to manually hard code in every single aspect of like an active camera node. Right now, it's only the object reference. If there would be an option for us to get the data ourselves, that's why I'm kind of proposing the view layer attribute node in the shader editor. Because with the view layer attributes, you can get most of the data that you would want. But let's go another 15 minutes of free rant. I'll take it. I will cut it off. I have to cut it off before 1 hour and 30 minutes. Blur node in the shader editor. Unfortunately, that's not really possible. It's both possible and not really possible at the same time, because the Blender's render engine uses wait, what's the name of it? I'm blanking on that. Basically, you could use white noise to dither a texture, but if you want it to be actually blurred, that would need to be in kind of a grid type data, you know. Basically, take vertices and you can blur on those vertices, but with here, the textures are seemingly infinite, or the procedural textures and such are basically infinite resolution because it's a procedural shader. And, complicated math stuff. I've exhausted my very few neurons with talking about the view layer attribute node. And by the way, this part right here is pretty useless. I mean, baking textures. Yeah, like, okay. We have 1 minute left, so I'm just going to go over this a little bit. Technically, Blender does have a texture editor, which that's where you would have a blur node, but it's, as far as I know, there's been like they haven't used this in like years. I don't remember ever actually using this in my like 7 to 8 years of using Blender on and off. That's where they would put it if they ever decided to, not in this shader editor. Alright, thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. This is the actual time where I'm going to end the stream, so see ya.